Hi, I'm JP, this is the Coffee Channel, and today we're talking about grinders, not the app, this sort of thing here, this sort of thing here. Most important thing for your coffee and the flavour of it is your grinder. It will make more difference than anything else. Now, this is a £30 grinder, this is a grinder that will cost you nearly £3,000. What we're going to look at today is what is the difference between them, and is this thing worth it? Right, so to start off with, the grinder I've got here is pretty much the cheapest, decent-ish grinder that you can get. It's a hand grinder, it's about 30 quid, maybe a bit more in some parts of the world. It's got conical burrs, you've got to wind it round with your hands. It produces reasonable quality grounds in terms of the taste of the coffee that you get from them, but it does have some drawbacks, which we'll look at in a minute. Over here is a Mahlkonig EK43. It's the industry standard. It's used in the World Barista Championships. I'd say it's the best grinder in the world. Some people would argue that there are others that are as good, but I've never had a better tasting coffee than I've had on one of these grinders. Problem with them, they're massive. They cost a fortune and they're overkill for most people. Now, there's going to review these things with no conflict of interest here because I actually own both of these grinders myself. This one we have in our coffee shop up here. This one I use for when I'm traveling. So let's take a look at this one first. Let's have a look at the first thing that we might talk about with grinders is the speed of grinding. Okay, so obviously a hand grinder is going to be slower, but how much slower is it going to be? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our 14 grams of coffee that we're going to make for an AeroPress, and we're going to grind them on this, and we're going to grind them on the EK43, and we're going to see how long each one takes. Okay, so I've weighed out my 14 grams of beans. We're going to see just how quick this EK43 is. And it is a 1/2 horsepower motor in here, which is going to be a lot more than my arm is going to produce. I can tell you that. 90 to 98 millimeter burrs, so it's going to be really, really quick. It's one of the quickest grinders around, but let's see how quick. Okay, switch it on and time it from now. So I make that about 5 seconds, probably a bit less actually. And we've got a nice even grind distribution there. So that's one of the important things about this that we'll come in a minute, is that the grind on it is very even on the EK43. That's why people use them for amongst many other reasons. But the main reason is the grind uniformity. How similar are the particle sizes of these grounds? Okay, let's try the Hario Skerton. Okay, right, got my 14 grams. There we go. Starting to get a bit tired. Speed is decreasing. I mean, you do get a workout with this as well. I'm not sure quite what muscles you're working out, but something is happening. Maybe the biceps, triceps, I don't know. If there's anyone watching who's a PT or knows anything about this sort of thing, they can probably tell me what muscles I'm working out now. I'm going to swap hands. So basically speaking, you wouldn't want to be doing this in a shop environment. Not that anyone has, although I did once see a shop that was run by something of a hippie, and he did do all his filter coffee with hand grinders. I assume he didn't sell many filter coffees, otherwise he'd be doing this all day. So, I mean, yeah, as you can see, it's a slow process. So I'm not on a particularly fine grind setting here either, so it actually gets harder if you want to grind really fine. And if you're grinding for more than one person, it's somewhat laborious. But we're almost there. The upside, of course, is that you're not grinding very fast, so you're not putting much heat into the coffee grounds themselves, which can have an effect on the distribution of the grounds. Right, okay, so finally you can hear it stopped. I don't know, what do you reckon that was, about minute and a half maybe. And here we've got our grounds. I'm going to pour them into this cup to have a look at them. Okay, so first round definitely goes to the EK43. It's massively quicker. It's a real pain in the arse grinding by hand if you're grinding more than, you know, just one coffee. It's like, I feel like I had a workout. But if we look at the actual distribution of the grinds, it's not too bad. I probably got this on a little bit too fine, but it's not a bad distribution there. So in terms of the particle size, to go back to this, when you grind coffee, the smaller the grind size, the more surface area you're presenting for a given weight of coffee to the water. Now what that means is you're going to extract more because the surface area is greater that's being presented to the water up to a certain point, because there's a point where the water can't absorb any more of the coffee. So if those particles are all roughly the same size, your extraction is going to be more even. So as I said earlier, the EK produces a very uniform particle size. So you're going to get a very uniform extraction, which means your coffee is going to taste better, because instead of getting coffee that's over extracting with some of the smaller particles and under extracting with some of the bigger particles and then extracting correctly in the middle somewhere, you're getting more of those particles in the size that you want them to be. Whereas something like this grinder here, there's a wider range of particles in there. So there are some, at any given grind size, there'll be some big boulders and there'll be some very small fine particles. And those are going to add together and give you sort of undesirable flavours in your coffee, even though the average particle size might be the same as with the EK43. It's an average of lots of different figures rather than an average of all the same sort of figures. The average could be the same, but there's much more variation in the Hario grinder. What we're going to do now is we're going to grind some more coffee to make sure it's fresh, and then we're going to make some AeroPresses, see if there's a big taste difference between these two. And this is the Hario ground coffee. Okay. So this is the Hario ground coffee. Give it a few stirs. We're using a Mzungu, which is a Ugandan coffee from Gardelli Specialty Coffees. Okay, so we're going to flip that over. Okay, so we've made our two coffees on the AeroPress. So I've used the same recipe, slightly unfair in a few ways, which I'll discuss later, but I have to compare them like for like, and I don't want to start changing the recipes just for the sake of one grinder over the other. Okay, so I've got the EK on the left here, Hario on the right. So let's have a little taste, see what the difference is. Okay, so it's really clean tasting natural coffee from Gardelli. It's a Mzungu, which I've used before on these videos. Know it really well. It's got lots of like black forest gatto, cherry sort of flavours, kirsch, that sort of thing. Really nice and sweet, lingering aftertaste. Yeah, that's a lovely coffee. Now, that's the one with the EK. Let's try it with the Hario now and see if we're going to get some of the same flavours. Okay, so it's very similar. It's not probably as different as you'd expect. The fundamental quality of the coffee is in there. It's just like there's these bitter flavours in the background that you don't really get with the EK. So it's like the main flavour of it is that black forest gatto kirschy flavour, but then there's these sort of lingering kind of bitter flavours, like some bitter dark chocolate, like slightly smoky stuff. It's not over extracted. In fact, it was a coarser grind on the Hario than on the EK, but it has got that kind of bitterness to it. Now, it's certainly not terrible. I mean, I've had much worse coffees brewed on quite good equipment in coffee shops in the past, and that's like a £30 grinder. Okay, we're using decent water and we're using a fairly consistent method and very good beans, of course, but it's not as bad as you think it would be. It's perfectly palatable. Is there £2,470 worth of difference between these? Well, not on taste alone. The EK43 coffee is significantly better, but probably not £2,000 better than this one in terms of what you're spending on it. But obviously that there are other factors to take into account when you're in a coffee shop. You couldn't have a hand grinder. That's actually not a bad coffee. As I said, what's happening there, I imagine, is the larger particles that are larger than the size we want them to be, that you're getting more of with Hario. All grinders will produce a range of particle sizes for every given grind. No grinder out there will produce absolutely uniform particles at, you know, X microns, all at the same size. There'll always be a bit of range. It's just the range is much larger on the Hario than it is on the EK43. So what that means, those larger particles, those boulders, and we'll have a look at some grounds in a minute so I can show you what I mean. Those larger particles, they're presenting less surface area to the water because relative to their size, yeah. So it's like putting a whole bean in water and expecting it to extract. When you've got a big particle, it's not going to extract much for its weight. Whereas if you break that particle down into lots of little particles, it's going to extract a lot more efficiently because the surface area is greater for a given weight of coffee. So what you've got with the Hario is you've got those big boulders in there that are actually under extracting, so they're creating sort of a little bit of an acidic flavour, and then you've got some very, very fine particles which are probably finer than we want, and those are causing over extraction. So that's where those bitter flavours are coming from. You're getting lots of those bitter sort of dark flavours, almost like it's over extracted. The coffee isn't over extracted as a whole, but instead of the coffee being made up of the right extraction size particles, it's made up of lots of different size particles that all add up to an average that's near to what we want it to be. But the actual overall effect is that you get most of the flavours of the coffee that's ground on the EK43, but you're getting some negative flavours in there as well. So let's have a look at the actual grind of the two on paper close up, and you may be able to show you some of the differences there in particle size more easily. Okay, so on the right here we have the EK grounds, and on the left here we have the Hario grounds. Now the EK grounds were ground at 8.5, which is actually fairly coarse, but as you can see it's a fairly fine grind really. I could probably go finer than that actually. That said, for AeroPress I could go quite a few notches higher actually, but for the purpose of this it was fine. It was producing a good coffee. On the left here is the Hario, and as you can see some of the particles are about the same size as the EKs. Some of them are absolutely massive, which is not going to extract well. They look like just broken beans, shattered beans. Now I think this is down to burr stability. So the mechanism of how the burrs are held in place is a little bit flexible, and so the burrs are moving around a bit, and only a small movement in the burrs will create a big difference in the grind size, and that's going to produce that inconsistency that you're getting here and that you can taste in the cup. Okay, so it's noticeable that if you grind finer on the Hario, the consistency of grind size gets better, which makes it less suitable actually for coffees where you need to have a fairly coarse grind size like French press and maybe some pour overs. Better maybe for AeroPress where you can get away with quite a fine grind. The problem is as you go finer you tend to get more over extraction from the coffee, so it gets a bit more consistent, but you end up with some very, very fine particles in there, and you get that over extracted flavour from those. You get less of the under extracted boulders in there, but the fines, as we call them, the very small particles, become greater, and that gives it a bit of a more bitter flavour as well. So in summary, it's actually not a bad grinder. I mean, I own one, it's good enough for travel use. Is it good enough for a coffee aficionado to have as their only grinder? I'd say no, especially if you're making coffees for lots and lots of people. I would probably go up the range a bit and spend a fair bit more money. Maybe you're going to have to spend around £100. We're going to be looking at some grinders in that sort of price bracket in future, so stay tuned to the Coffee channel to see what we find. As ever, you'll answer your questions in the comment section. Please ask us anything you like and subscribe the video, and we'll see you for the next one soon.